generous benefaction from the late Professor David Siegel and Professor Beatrice Siegel. The leader of American medicine in the program today is Matthew Walker, formerly Professor of Surgery and currently Provost for Internal Affairs at Meharry Medical College, Nashville, Tennessee. Professor Walker is interviewed by Louis J. Bernard, who succeeded him as chairman of the Department of Surgery at Meharry.
Dr. Walker, a number of us who've known you over a period of years have heard you repeatedly say over and over again that you were born in Waterproof, Louisiana, and we hear you proudly talk about this as your hometown. How long were you there?
Well, I was in Waterproof about 3 or 4 years. I was born there, and of course, after a while, my mother and father moved to New Orleans for 2 reasons. One was for better economic situation, and the other was to allow me to have a better education. And then I moved to New Orleans.
You know, being there for only 3 or 4 years, the first 3 or 4 years of your life, I'm a little surprised, because I happen to know from my personal experience that every time you have the opportunity to present you back down there again, what was so attractive about it? What takes you back there?
Well, when I was in grade school, when I was in high school, in the summertime, when I was younger, I would go to the country. That's out to Waterproof. And there I would swim, help to plow, fish, hunt from time to time. And that's why I usually go back there now whenever I get a chance, and even bring my residents back there.
Where did you got your grade school education?
I got my grade school education in New Orleans. Fact of the matter, I started in New Orleans in kindergarten. We used to pay $10 a week in the Sims in kindergarten. Then I went to Tamala Farm. That was a public school in New Orleans. And of course, after public school, I went to high school in New Orleans at a private high school, private academy.
Well, why did you choose a private high school after having been in public school for 6, 7, or 8 years?
Well, my parents thought that I would get a better education in the private school. This was Gilbert Academy, which was a part of New Orleans University, and was a demonstration school.
And then you went right on into New Orleans University.
Right.
What kind of education would you consider you received during these years? Was this the classical kind of education? Was it a practice at that point in time to have 2 kinds of pathways for students, one intended to take them into college and into professions, and another into the trades? Or was this the usual classical education? What kinds of things?
It was the usual classical education with the foundations of Latin, French, and of course the basic sciences and that type of thing.
How much Latin did you get?
Well, I had 3 years of Latin and 4 years of French, 2 years of French in high school and 2 years of French in college.
Well, that French sounds great. What'd you do with that Latin?
I think the Latin was a benefit, really.
Really?
Really, because actually it's a lot of written, the basis of a lot of languages. And when I first got to medical school in those days, we wrote prescriptions in Latin, and it came in handy then.
I see. And do you have any special recollections of some of the people who taught you in those years, in those high school years and in those college years?
Well, yes, in the high school years, I remember very definitely a little lady from New England. She was white, because a lot of New Englanders came down to New Orleans University to teach, and she taught us mathematics. Her name was Miss Wheaton. And she made mathematics seem so simple and so beautiful. And then I recall another Miss Parker, who was a registrar. And fellows didn't have much money in those days. And I remember very definitely that one fellow had 4 grandmothers to die, because anytime somebody dies, they'd forgive you for your tuition and pay next time, and so on. But it was that type of thing. Then Reverend S.C. Walker, who eventually married my wife and me. And he was teaching us Bible and public speaking.
When did you decide that you were interested in medicine? What point along the way?
Actually, it was when I was in grade school, about 8th grade, when we were studying hygiene. And that hygiene just appealed to me. And I thought that the closest I could get to really dealing with hygiene was to be a physician.
Was that the only choice? Did you consider anything else?
Oh, yes, but this Reverend Walker, who taught us Bible, wanted me to go into ministry.
You've been a great preacher.
Well, maybe so, but I finally didn't go out.
Okay. And throughout your years of high school and the years in college, this remained pretty firm.
Right.
So you really had entered college with the idea that you'd be going on in medicine.
And not only that, of course, all my college preparation was toward medicine.
Uh-huh.
And
What kinds of things did you take? What was your major at that point?
New Orleans was known, New Orleans University was known for a number of sciences. And so there we took histology, embryology, anatomy, and all of the biology, bacteriology, and the total course in biology. We even dissected the cat and even made 100 slides. I remember it very definitely.
Good. Now, in choosing medicine, do you feel that you could articulate for me what your feelings were, other than the fact that hygiene was interesting, that made you decide to go into medicine as a career?
Well, as I grew older, of course, I began to realize that medicine first would give a lot of service to people. The next thing, the idea of getting people well who were sick, that simple thing appealed to me. And of course, as I went further and further, I realized how important that whole idea was.
How did you choose Meharry as a place to get your medical school education?
Well, I chose Meharry first because there were two schools around there. That is Tulane and LSU. But in those days it was unthinkable for a black to enter a white medical school.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, it didn't bother me at all. It was the order of the day, and I just say, well, one of these days they'll learn some sense. And so I went on to Meharry because my family physician was from Meharry. That was Dr. Bowers. And then, of course, we had another physician.
Charles Bowers?
Charles Bowers, that's right. He has a son who finished medicine also. And another Dr. Alexander came to town. And, of course, those two impressed me to come to Meharry.
I happen to know that you delayed a year going into medical school from coming out of college. Did you have a problem getting admitted?
No, the question was I had a friend who we studied together in college. And actually what we did, about 5 of us, used to put up 25 cents apiece for examinations. And the one who'd make the highest mark would get the whole pot. And this boy Bickham was my strongest competitor. He couldn't go that year. Didn't have money quite together. And so I agreed to stay out a year for him so we could be classmates at Meharry. But he died in the meantime, so I came all by myself.
That's pretty interesting as a reason for delaying. I have occasionally listened to medical school students pretty frequently and have them tell me their problems and what an ordeal medical school is. How did you feel about being a medical student?
Well, actually it was a lot of fun. The first thing I remember that made a difference to me was I realized that there was a difference in medical school and college, because I'd had all those basic sciences in college. I had histology, I had embryology, and I just wouldn't read them, that's all. Wasn't no point in reading. I knew enough about them. And I woke up one day and had an examination with 20 on the paper. Then I had to change my whole way of living and bear down.
I'll have to be sure to report that to some of your old students, saying you did make a 22. Okay. Who were some of your teachers then?
One of the
remember?
Yes, in the basic science, the man who gave me the 20 was Dr. Hernandez, who was a very excellent teacher. Histology was his field, psychiatry and neurology. He happened to be a pharmacist and also an attorney. And so he was well prepared classically.
Herney.
Right, Herney, that's right. Then Dr. Raw was a very excellent teacher, and Dr. West in chemistry. Those are the ones I remember very definitely in the basic sciences. Now in the clinical sciences, of course, Dr. Hale, Dr. McMillan, who was surgeons, and then there was a man, Dr. Reed, we call him War Reed, it was Walter Reed, but he was really tough. He taught what was then known as therapeutics and pharmacology, and he was classical.
Well, what do you mean he was classical?
Well, I mean he knew Greek, he knew Latin, he knew what was formal, what was proper, what was improper, and he knew ethics. Really, that's the first man who really let me know the importance of real ethics in a medical student in one early, because when I finished medical school, I had agreed to stay at Meharry. Then the lady for whom I worked in New Orleans was a Catholic, and she had arranged for me to go to St. Louis with the Catholic school there to intern. And so Dr. Reed told me, said, listen, you give me a word here at Meharry. And I don't care if you don't have but one patient in Meharry and have 100 patients there, you won't be worth anything if you break your word. So you have to stay here. And so I stayed to Meharry, and I don't regret it.
Now, as you came out of Meharry, you did an internship. At what point along the line did you make a decision that surgery was the thing of...
Well, I was a sophomore when I decided to be surgery. The reason I decided on surgery, it appears to me that surgery got people well quicker than medicine. It just appeared to me that medicine, you took a teaspoonful of water 3 times a day after meals. That didn't do any good. You took a teaspoonful of water 3 times a day before meals. But with surgery, you just cut it out, and the patient get all right. So that's why I went to surgery.
I hope not too many of your medical friends will hear it. But are you saying to me that you felt that you were a more active participant in what happened to the patient?
Right, and I could control it better as an individual, you see, rather than waiting. But of course, the medical people, with all due respect to them, have just as definite ideas about getting people well as a surgeon does.
They do.
But to me, surgery was the thing.
Now, realizing that Meharry in 1934 did not have a structured residency program, I was wondering if you'd describe for me how you proceeded to get this training.
Well, the first thing, the president and Hale and McMillan, all of them wanted me to stay at Meharry with a complete training.
Who are Hale and McMillan?
Well, Dr. Hale was the head of surgery at that time, and Dr. McMillan was the head of gynecology. And I was working with both of them. And so I agreed to stay. And so in general surgery, Dr. Hale was my teacher. In gynecology, Dr. McMillan was my teacher. And we went on and on, year 1, 2, 3. I think I was the first resident had stayed there 3 years.
How many residents did you have?
Didn't have one. I was the only resident.
I see.
And when I had one resident on surgery, one resident on medicine. The resident on surgery covered general surgery, gynecology, obstetrics, ear, nose and throat, orthopedics, and urology. He covered everything. And of course, in those days, the resident was teaching everything. And so it gave me a terrifically broad experience.
So really you were preceptive, pretty much.
Right.
What do you think about this as a technique for training people?
I think it's all right if that's the best you have, but that was the form of training, you know, in the older days. And of course, the form of residency was developed. And after I finished there, of course, they gave me a General Education Board fellowship to go and study under Dr. Everett Howes, who had started off at Yale and went to Columbia and then came to Howard. And I was there with him for a year. And after then, of course, I went to various places. Went to Harvard, used to go with Dr. Oliver Cope every summer for 2 weeks to a month, Mayo Clinic, Lay Clinic, those various places. So first, I wanted to know what was in the mainstream of surgery, because I decided to develop a surgical training program. Next, I wanted to be sure to know what was going on. And then, of course, surgeons operating, I wanted to see all those operations I hadn't seen, and I was able to do all that.
Who are the people who were advising you in this time period?
Well, during the earlier days, Dr. Hale, Dr. McMillan, when I was being trained, advised me together with Dr. Turner. Dr. Turner was a man who had come from the Rockefeller Foundation. He had been at Beirut there as the Rockefeller man in that university. And then he came to Meharry.
What, American University in Beirut?
American University in Beirut. Then he came to Meharry as head of internal medicine. And then, of course, he became president. He was white, but he was a very fine man, and he really brought the scientific medicine to Meharry. And he got interested in me somehow and began to advise me straight on through. In fact, he used to want to appoint me head of the Department of Surgery when Dr. Hale died in 1944.
At what point in time did you consider yourself no longer a trainee, but your expression, full-grown surgeon?
Well, it was a long time before I considered myself a full-grown surgeon. At first, I wasn't prepared, I wasn't ready to be head of the department. Dr. Hale just happened to die, and I was there, and they made me head. But after I'd been head for about a year or two, I finally decided I could do all right.
You were
full-grown man.
Full-grown man.
Right.
What happened to bring you to feel this way?
Well, there were a number of cases that came in. I remember two in particular. One was a big arterial venous aneurysm in the groin, and which I'd never seen anybody do. And I picked him up in South Carolina at the Long's Clinic. The group from Howard had turned him down. The group from St. Louis had turned him down. I told him to send him to Nashville. I'd do him. So we demonstrated him with all the signs and symptoms and everything for the clinic, and they sent him to Nashville. And in those days,
Where was it from? Stab wound, gunshot wound, or what?
gunshot wound, you see, in the groin. It was classical, I mean, all the bruise and everything. And so Dr. Bonner Brooks, who was at the head of surgery at Vanderbilt, was the individual who was doing that type of thing in this area. And Dr. Elkin in Georgia, Atlanta. And then, of course, down in New Orleans, they had a group. And so I saw Dr. Brooks was doing a war about doing this. He said, okay, send him over to Vanderbilt. And so Dr. Turner said, what do you say about it? I said, no, I won't send him over to Vanderbilt. If he come over here and do it, it's all right. But if he doesn't come over here and do it, I'll do it myself. And because all my students and staff couldn't go over there, but my students and staff must see it. At that time, we hadn't developed the esprit de corps that we later developed. And so we sent one of his top men, Dr. Edwards, on at it, look at it for about 15, 20 minutes and get a drawing. He ended up staying there 3 hours while I sweat over the case. And of course, the case was finished, and every day when Dr. Brooks would call up, ask Dr. Turner how was the man, he said he's doing fine. The man went on back to South Carolina, started drinking liquor in the same tavern, and started all over again. But
Did he get shot again?
No, I didn't get shot no more out of here.
Okay.
So since then, I consider myself.
You know, mentioning the war years reminds me that you had a very auspicious event to take place on your 35th birthday. That was Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
How's it you, I don't know anything about your military record.
Well, in those days, they had what they called Satan men were frozen in medical schools in order to teach medical students to provide physicians for the war. Now, I wanted to go to the war, not because I was angry with anybody, but I wanted to go to the war in order to get some experience in war surgery. But I was one of the ones who was frozen to teach, and I stayed at Meharry to teach.
Mm-hmm. So you were there that time period when you were turning out not quite 90-day wonders as it did for the infantry and the artillery and stuff, but you were turning out something of a wonder where you were taking kids 2 years out of college and putting them through 28 months of a medical school experience and giving them medical degrees.
Yes, that was a hectic time for the teachers, because usually the teachers kind of take it easy.
What kind of doctors do you think you were turning out?
Well, I think they did all right, actually. I have done no scientific study to see just how they compare with other doctors, but generally, they have been just as good.
Do you think that's the way to go? You know, it would be maybe a little cheaper to do it that way.
Well, I think it's
and
just...
you'd be turning them out a little faster.
I think probably the medical profession can stand that, because in this day of specialization, and one doesn't need all the stuff that we give them. It's too much. It could be condensed. It could give them the core of the education, and then let them spend the extra years in a particular specialty that they would want. And I think it would be just as good. I don't think it would be as broad, but it might not be necessary to be as broad. If you're going to work on the eye, why learn all that stuff about the toe?
Okay. You might get some arguments on that. So that in 1944, 10 years out of medical school, you found yourself chairman of a department of surgery. And you must have had some idea of where you wanted to go at that point.
Oh, yes. The first thing I did was sat down and wrote out the progress and development department of surgery for the next 20 years, which included training of residencies taking their board, training of men and various specialists to bring back to help the Department of Surgery to make it a complete department, and also included visiting and making friends and contact with the leading surgeons throughout the country. And all I was planned. One of the most interesting things, as I look back on it now, was that at the end of 20 years, the salary for the professor and head of the department was $10,000.
Yeah, I've seen that. I thought that was pretty interesting.
All
too.
right.
Now, as chairman of a department, after going through a variety of things in terms of your exposure and in terms of your training, do you have any problem being admitted to examination by the American Board of Surgery or to the surgical societies?
No, there was no problem to the American Board of Surgery, because with the training that I had and training with Dr. Howes, I was admitted. And of course, it so happened that I'd done all those basic sciences. I'd done 3 years of anatomy, 3 years of pathology, 3 years of physiology, 3 years of bacteriology, while I was going in all this process development. And I was pretty well grounded in basic sciences, together with extensive reading. And when the board was given at Johns Hopkins, Hopkins wrote Dr. Turner that I made one of the 2 highest marks at Johns Hopkins at the time. And so there was no problem about the board, but the problem was in these American College of Surgeons and those type of organizations. Because at that time, there wasn't one black man in the American College of Surgeons. And he was in New York, and I understand he had just got in there because he was one of the ones who had come from Harvard, and it took them all together. And so I just wouldn't even apply for it. And so
I appreciate that.
one day, Dr. Barney Brooks at Vanderbilt, he and I had developed good relationship then after I had made the showing on the board and after arterial venous aneurysm. Then he was just almost a father to me. Everything at Vanderbilt, all the surgeons at Vanderbilt were on my staff. And then the fellow who was neurosurgeon, Piotr and Meacham, were on the staff, Daniels, and even Burlock was on the staff when he was there on chest surgery. And we didn't have any staff. I was the only surgeon there. And so I had to get them, and they were willing to come, and Meharry didn't have any money, so they came for nothing. Except some of them who came regularly, every week. I paid them a noble sum of $50 a month. That was just a token.
I happen to know you're still paying some of them just $50.
Right, right. Well, you was head of the department now. That's your word to change that. But we didn't have the money in those days.
All right. Now, so you suddenly found yourself with a department of bill with a program that you wanted to mount. I wonder if you would tell me something about exactly how you went about doing this thing.
Well, the first thing I had to find out what was going on in the mainstream, as I indicated. And the only way to find that out, there was no travel funds in those days, no developmental funds. So I took my own money. And every summer went to these various places, Harvard, Yale, Michigan, Minnesota, and so on, and made contact with the leaders in surgery at the time. This is for 2 reasons. First, to learn what was going on in surgery at these places so I could map my program accordingly. Second, to make these friendships so I could have a basis, a place for sending my men for further training.
Now, it seems to me if you're talking this way, you had some particular idea where you wanted to go. Where do you think those ideas came from?
Well, as I remember, the most important thing to me was the fact that when I became head of the Department of Surgery, and Dr. Hale had died, they had no surgeons on the market. They couldn't buy no matter how much money they had. It just so happened that I was around, and of course had paid some attention to surgery. But I suppose they wanted to consider 5 or 6 men. They wanted 5 or 6 men in the country trained to be head of a department. And so I decided then to train so many men and train them well that anytime a man is wanted in surgery, there'd be so many to select for that I'd have no problem. The next, I decided to train these men so that to have the best possible black men to compete favorably anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world. And that's what I set out to do because it was needed. They were not on the market, and the only thing to do was develop them.
At the time you took over from Dr. Hale, how many residents did you have?
I had one resident. That was Dr. Clark. And Dr. Clark was a resident who came along like I was coming along. And of course he was there 1 year after Dr. Hale died. But my first resident before was Dr. Hilliard. And Dr. He was a full-time resident. And then of course in those days I was head of gynecology also. Then I had a resident in gynecology which made 2, one in general surgery and one in gynecology. Now the gynecology resident would have to do some surgery in order to learn how to sew up a gut if you put a hole in it. And then the surgical resident rotated through gynecology in order to do it. Now the gynecology resident could not be trained in gynecology alone. He had to also be in obstetrics. But in obstetrics had to go under Dr. James and that type of thing. And so this is the way it started. Then the next one was Dr. Yancey, A.C. Yancey here in Atlanta.
Talking about Dr. Yancey, how did you find yourself in terms of being supplied with clinical material for getting a residency program really moving?
Well, I soon realized that in medicine, 10 people could listen at one heart. But in surgery, when you cut out one appendix, you treat that patient and to get some more patients somewhere else. And so the Mount Bayou situation opened up. Actually, it was
Well, what do you mean the Mount Bayou situation?
Well, there was a group in Mount Bayou known as the Mysterious International Order of 12 of the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. And that was headed by Sir P.M. Smith, who was the father of the Keller Miller Smith here in Nashville. And they came to me about running this hospital. Well, Dr. Hale had just died and I was working there. And I was debating as whether or not to leave. And so, of course, after turn, all of them told me there was no point in thinking about leaving. And so I finally told them that I'd send them 3 or 4 names to they could get. So they selected one. And then after 3 years, they had parted friends, so they came back to me again. And when they came back to me again, I told them that I still couldn't come myself, but I have a residency training program that I could supply them in and run the surgery in that hospital. And that's where it began, in Mount Bayou. And I was going to Mount Bayou. We had 4 objectives. One was that we wanted to give a better health care delivery to the people in the area. Second, I wanted a place for my more advanced men in surgery. Third, we wanted to teach them about community health, preventive medicine, and that type of thing. And we also wanted to offer a place for the black doctors in the area to learn how to go in a hospital. Because at that time, black doctors had no hospital to go into. And the poor little fellows who finished medicine 10, 20 years previously didn't know how to write on a chart because it just wasn't permitted. And so that offered a place for them to go. And we'd hold conferences and seminars and that type of thing for all the surgeons and doctors in the area.
Who was the first man you sent down there?
The first man I sent down there was Hayat. The next man I sent down was Yancey, and so on down the line. So after Yancey, my idea was that after one finishes in our program, that he would go down there as chief surgeon for at least a year. And of course, he would go down as a sophomore. Yancey had come from the program, from Drew's program, based in Chicago, and Drew and I were running simultaneously departments.
I happen to know about some other things that you apparently were concerned and doing at that point in time. In 1948, you had the first, Hale McMillan lecture. I think Dr. Howells was Dr. Howells your first?
Dr. Daly was first.
Dr. Daly was the first lecturer. Tell me about that, and why'd you do that?
Well, Dr. Hale and Dr. McMillan were very notable pioneering surgeons. They've done a great job for surgery and for medicine and for obstetrics and gynecology in Nashville. So I thought that it was fitting and proper to honor them and to keep their memory alive by having the most outstanding men in surgery at the time to come give a lecture every year. And that's when we started. And with the contacts that I had made already by going about throughout the country, I didn't have any difficulty getting the leading surgeons at the time to give these lectures.
Are those still running?
Oh, they're still running. This is about the 20th, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
28th annual
Since 1948.
Yeah, lecture.
You were doing some other kinds of things too at that time. I know you shipped Hilliard, you shipped Bennett, and you tried to ship Kane. And
oh yes, that was interesting. Now, as I told you, when I started, I was the only man in the department, and I soon realized that I could do all those, work in all those areas. I work from the head, the guy get hit in the head, and then go to the neck.
hand surgeon, that's
yeah,
all.
Right, hand surgeon, everything I could get my hands on.
Oh.
But I realized I couldn't last, and so then I decided to develop more men to come back and teach. Now it so happened that I was fortunate enough to attract good men to the program, and of course give them the maximum amount of training with emphasis on excellence, emphasis on really paying attention to the patient, emphasis on reading extensively, emphasis on going to basic sciences. Since I went to all those basic sciences, they had to go also because I thought that was a good basis for surgery. And of course research, we had all the residents trying to do research, but I finally found out that all of them were not interested, but those who were interested went on with the research. Now, we kept that up, and then I finally decided to send them off to these various places, men who, and when I started off, I just tell John, you go here, and Henry, you go here. But Bennett, I think, sort of broke me up on that, because I sent Bennett to Harvard, and with Dr. Francis Moore. Now, I thought anybody who would go there would want it, but then he was saying, he wanted to go to Memorial, but I sent Frank Perry to Memorial. And I used to have $30 telephone bill to make Bennett stay there. But he did well there. He, in those days, Francis Moore had applications from everywhere. He told me the difficulty of accepting a man. And the competition and how they would come there on probation for 6 weeks. So I told him, frankly, don't worry about a man that I send him. He worry about his own men because they'll be able to compete well with anybody. 3 weeks after Bennett was there, they had Bennett teaching, and so there was no probation at all. And he delivered the research paper from the Department of Surgery on 11-oxyketosteroids at the American College of Surgery Fundamental Forum, which means that he didn't well, and Frank Perry did the same thing at Memorial and so on.
Good. Who paid for this?
Well, what I used to do, that was a long story, because in addition to get them the place, I had to get them the money. And the General Education Board, the Rockefeller Foundation, I remember we used to go up to see Dr. Lampert and all that type of thing about getting money for them. I had to get the money for them also, and was able to do it that way. And all I had to do was travel, make the contacts, get in the positions, and all these men, to round it out, Bennett at Harvard with Dr. Moore and with Dr. Cope, and then Frank Perry started off with Moore, first under Dr. Whipple, then under Dr. Randall, then of course David Todd under Dr. Lillahai and heart surgery, Dooley under Dr. Stein at that time in orthopedics, then Navy Brown at Memorial, that is Edward Brown, I call him Navy because I had so many Browns, then of course Dr. Charles Brown at Harvard with Dr. Sweet and so on. And all those are back now. At first, when I sent them, a lot of them didn't come back. Then I decided to stop sending them away. I just give them the best I could there, here at Meharry, and I didn't know them anymore. And so I did that for about 2 years, but after then, I stopped. I decided then to train so darn many of them, because the law of overflow would make certain one of them come back to Meharry. What I was trying to do is develop a program at Meharry.
Has that worked to your satisfaction?
Quite well.
Good.
You, sir, is one of those individuals, and you're here in the department now, so it did pay off.
What do you consider your major contributions to medicine and medical science? What are the things that you, if someone had to deliver a eulogy and said, these are the things that really made Matthew Walker's life and career worth it, what would you say they were?
I think the most important thing, as I see it, was my training of men. It might have come from the natural feeling of reproducing one's kind. But I think it's more than that. It's the fact that the need in the country was for the training of men, particularly black men. And I decided to devote my life to training of men. Because I'm only one person, but if I train 50 or 100 men, I have that many men to deliver good health care in the world. Another thing that interested me was the question of delivery of health care to the ghetto, delivering of health care to rural areas. And that's where Mount Bayou came in. And as I said, I started out Mount Bayou for the reason I indicated, but found out the question grew. Then we got interested in the whole problem of delivery of health care. And the outreach program at Meharry now, with the mission at Meharry now, that is empathy for the disadvantaged, partnership with the community, academic excellence, was started as the beginning with the grant over $1 million for a rural health center in Mount Bayou and a comprehensive urban center here in Nashville.
What's the name of the one in Nashville? Do you
Well,
know?
somehow they were kind enough to name it the Matthew Walker Health Center.
Okay. All right. So you were saying that the two things that you've told me about have been this matter of training men, and what I heard coming through to me, you were talking about postgraduate training.
Right.
And you were talking about healthcare delivery and attempting to affect the whole system.
Right.
One thing that I know about you haven't mentioned to me.
What's that?
Remember the many a times you've told me when that student flunks is my fault?
Oh, yes, that took a long time to get over to my staff. All these men who I was training, actually I happened to be chairman of the curriculum committee at the same time. And I had definite philosophies about how to teach. And the first place I was against all those lectures because I didn't think lectures were anything but showmanship for the lecturer. I thought a student could learn better by being guided and directed to go read himself and then come back and teach you. And I thought that the teacher was responsible for the student's success or failure. And I would tell my men all the time that if a student fails, the teacher also fails. Because it's up to the teacher to teach the student in such a way or provide an atmosphere of learning that was so important to the students to learn.
What do you say about surgical residents now?
Surgical residents, I said about surgical residents, you cannot carve rotten wood. So there's no point in selecting a man who's no good. Because if you select a man who's no good, he's rotten wood, he's going to be rotten wood if you take him 12 years. And so I selected men who were good, frankly.
Okay. That's That's where those residents came from that pool of students, huh?
Right.
So,
But some residents and some individuals just paid more attention to medicine than others. But the most important thing is they were willing to work. Because they couldn't be a moron. They had to have some brains. But I remember Dr. Hale used to tell us to ask Edison, you're a genius, you've done all these things. What is your success? What is the reason for you being a genius? Edison said, a genius is a man who works and works and works and works. Now, a good resident is a man who works and works and works and works.
Does that apply to medical students too?
Yeah, but of course you'd be a little more lenient with a medical student than you would with a resident, you see. Because with a medical student, my philosophy is salvage. And we should do everything we can to salvage this medical student, even giving him remedial work and all that type of thing. Because we want to increase the number of medical physicians.
All right, so you've been very much concerned about this business of training medical students. You've been very much concerned about training surgeons. Now, this causes me to raise a very specific issue with you, and I'm sure that many of us these days have given thought to this. I've seen a good deal of material coming out from the AMA, from the American College of Surgeons, which would say that maybe we're saturated with surgeons. Maybe we have too many surgeons. Why are you talking about continuing to train surgeons or having a continuing interest over so long in training surgeons?
Well, those statistics might apply to whites, but I don't think they apply to blacks. The first thing, we don't have too many black surgeons, we don't have enough. Of course, not only the big thing in that is distribution. Now, how are we going to distribute these surgeons, white and black, to the places where they're needed is a problem to be solved.
Do you have any idea about how to do that?
Well, some of the South American countries have not allowed them to get their degrees and that type of thing until they spend so much time in the rural and the place to the ghetto. We can withhold their final certificates until they spend so much time. That might be bad.
There are rumors to the effect, you know, that the federal government will draw all support from medical schools, and you will then have to pay from the nub, you know, the full cost of the experience, which would then mean lots of people would be borrowing money if they elected to go to medical school. Do you think this might be a technique for
Right, and they could forgive the loan if they spend so many years in the ghetto, so many years in the rural. That would be a good idea.
How do you feel about the men you've turned out over this 30-year time period that you chair that department?
Well, as we study what these men are doing, we find out first in almost every community that the men are among the top men in scientific surgery in the community. To my surprise, I found out that a number of those men had gone into various health delivery systems, surgeons. They've been head of comprehensive health clinics and that type of thing. I don't know whether it's the fact of surgeons want to get things done.
People tell me they're aggressive that way, you know, they just got to do things.
That could be it. And of course, it's amazing and really gratifying to see the large number of fellows whom I've trained who are on the faculties of medical schools. And they're keeping up there, who's still doing research, who's still studying, who's still going to meeting. Because actually, as you know, I started off taking them to the American College of Surgeons before I was a member of the college. And in those days, we had no grants, we had no money, and what we did was I put them in my car, and a bunch of us went together, stayed at the YMCA because we didn't have much money, and we all enjoyed ourselves. We had a grand time. Because the whole question of the development of surgery in our program, that it was a family affair. It was a family affair, no big U and little I and that type of thing. Everybody was working to first do the best job possible, second, to produce in a way that they could compete favorably with residents from any school in the world, and third, in order to be able to be the best type of surgeon after you finished and make the best possible showing on the American Board of Surgery.
Mr. Leonard, have you ever heard of an organization called Matthew Walker Surgical Club?
Yes, I have. The fellows were very nice and kind.
Yeah.
They formed that around about
1958.
1958.
Yeah.
And at that time, I trained 67 surgeons, and up to now it's about 100 that have come under my tutelage. Now, they have a very great time. I never will forget that we usually have two rooms. One room to drink liquor and tell lies, and the other room to sit down and eat and tell lies. And such a lie and telling at those meetings.
Yeah, that's usually held at the time of the
American College of Surgeons
meeting. Let's shift gears a little bit. What are some of your pet ideas, some of the things that throughout your lifetime have really moved you, that things that are important to you? And I'm not talking about just medicine or surgery, but I'm talking about you as an individual.
Well, I think it's difficult to tell, but one of the things was I've been impressed and intrigued with the whole process of information, the phenomenon of information in the matter of surgical development. And when I started on Dr. Howe's, I had one phase of information that was wound healing. And of course, when penicillin first came out, we did some research in the whole question of penicillin and peritonitis. And I never forget, in those days, unlike now, we paid the individuals nothing because our team was composed mostly of students. And I remember Dr. Ralph Gazard, who's not being, was head of this group. And the students had it so well that they could produce peritonitis by tying off the appendage and giving the patient in the artery and giving the patient, the dog rather, castor oil. And of course they could predict just about how long the dog would live. And one of the things that we enjoyed about that is we had the only pure culture of tetanus in the whole hospital at the time, in the whole laboratory. And so that whole process of information and penicillin and that time. And incidentally, I saw the fellow, the first man we did Pascal the other day, in which I called him an 18-hole golf course. And he was supposed to die, of course, but with the operation sewing up the holes in the intraperitoneal penicillin that we had found was most efficacious in the dog, he's now working as a supervisor in Detroit.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Now, the other thing that intrigued me, is the delivery of health care, comprehensive health care. Our concern for the individual who does not have good health care. Our concern not to just wait till he comes to our office as episodic care, but to go out and look for him and bring him in and give him preventive care and take care of him properly as a human being.
What's a surgeon doing talking about that kind of stuff?
Well, I think a surgeon, to be a surgeon, he's got to be interested in human beings, not just the surgeon. He's got to in a total individual. He must be.
You know, recently you've been on my back about something that I've got to ask you about. For what is it, for about 2 years now? This Committee on Death and Dying.
Oh, yes. As chairman of the curriculum committee, I have had a lot of fun trying to get my concept of the way curriculum should be developed, and we change every 2 years just about. Everything from early introduction of the patients to the student, integration of medicine, all that type of thing. But death and dying is the latest kick I had, really, because people don't know how to die, and doctors who go out are going to have people who die. I never forget what Dr. Roman used to say, out of all his reading, and all his education, and all his travel, one thing is known to be constant, that the mortality of the human race is 100%. So there will be deaths. So we just need to teach these medical students how to die themselves, and also teach them how to face death with their patients. And so therefore, in the curriculum committee, we have appointed a committee on death and dying to see how we're going to...
Do you have any personal ideas about how this needs to be done?
Oh, yes, I think what we should do is to have a committee that we have of physicians, surgeons, ministers, lawyers, and that type of thing, forming the nucleus of the committee, and teach it in an integrated fashion so that they would recognize that death is a natural phenomenon and that death should not cause anybody to go to pieces, but rather would do everything first to prevent death. But once death occurs, we should adjust because the living must continue to go on.
You've seen a lot of changes in medicine over the years. Is the medical student entering Meharry today the same as the medical student entering Meharry in 1944?
Well, when I talk to the old students, they swear that they're better than the students today. But that can't be so. Maybe in some instances they apply themselves more, it appears. But with the added methods of teaching that we have, added methods of stimulation, and with the total broad spectrum of approaches that we have, I think the medical students today is ahead of the medical students of yesterday.
Do you think medicine is continuing to attract the very best college graduate as...
Well, at one time we did have that problem, let us say about 10 years ago, that individuals were going to engineering or something of the sort, rather than going to medicine, who were brilliant, because medicine was too much punishment. And with this type of thing, you could go and go from 8 to 5 to work, and without worry about getting up at night. And even physicians' sons and daughters figured that was a better way to make a living than to go into medicine. But I think that's beginning to change a little bit now, because they realize that medicine is a very important calling, and that the matter of restoring individuals to health is one of the greatest things that an individual can do for his lifetime.
Tell me, how did you survive the times when medical students were pretty much in revolt? I don't think one sees a great deal of that right at the moment, but I understand that there was a good deal of that going on in the latter half of the 60s, and particularly in schools like Meharry.
Yes, it just so happened by the nature of me, perhaps, that I've been able to develop a good esprit de corps with medical students through the years. The first thing, I give them absolute freedom, all the liberty they want. They can criticize me, ask any questions they want, and whenever they have a problem, I'm willing to listen to it, and that type of thing. And as a result, I've had no problem. They have cooperated with everything I wanted to do.
Even to taking the beards off, or is it you don't care about the beards?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, no, I don't be stupid. No, the beards has nothing to do with the brains. I don't care how long the beards are, how long the hair is. I do care about the brains and how much time to put in their studies.
Okay. Now, let's go back once again. You've been a physician now for 40 plus years. You've lived through a time period when there were no antibiotics. The last night you were talking about the treatment of PID with milk injected into the buttocks, etc. Through the discovery and the use of the sulfonamides to the antibiotics to good anesthesiologists. How do you feel about this tremendous panorama of things that you've seen occur in your lifetime?
Well, the first thing, it is all for the good. It is a natural thing of progress. And we must realize, we who go through the mill and we who live through the years, that time means progress. And that as progress occurs, we have to keep up with progress. That is one thing that physicians and others must do. What we learned when we finished medical school would do us not much good today unless we kept up every day. We keep up, we must read our journals, we must go to medical society meetings, and we must go to all of them that we can go to, and we must be sure to keep up with the latest things, because what we learned when we finished medical school is almost obsolete today. And so it must be accepted that there should be an increase in the amount of things to which one is exposed. But now you say, how can you cram all that in the 4 years or 3 years? Well, what we've done through the years is we've dropped some of the stuff. We don't have those lectures on typhoid fever anymore, because we don't have no typhoid fever. We don't have much time on tuberculosis anymore. We don't have any tuberculosis. But we have all these new things, nutrition, and metabolic diseases, and that type of thing we must pay attention to.
Now, medicine seems to me to have changed very significantly in some other ways. Because nowadays we have, what do you call them, consumer consuls?
Yeah.
And we have lay people coming in and CHP telling us what we're going to do. The relationship between American medicine and the society of which we are part is very, very much different now from what it was 40 years ago. How do you feel about that?
Well, I tell you, that's one of the hardest things for the medical profession to accept. I mean, those who are disturbed about that type of thing. Because medicine generally has just said, it's a matter of relationship between the doctor and the patients. No layman should come in between. But as time develops, as society develops, not only in America, but throughout Europe, Asia, everywhere, we find out that the consumer is beginning to have more to say about his health care. He has more to say about what type of care he gets, when he gets it, and the rest of it. And we just as well to accept the fact that the consumer is going to have something to say about his health care and go along with it.
Tell me, if we could go back a few years and you had to decide again, and you were again choosing a career, but in the present setting, would you still choose to be a physician?
I would still choose to be a physician.
Still going to surgery?
Right, still going to surgery, there's no question about it.
Okay, why?
Well, in the first place, I think one can get a greater fulfillment, from my point of view, by doing medicine than he can by anything that I can think of. And after medicine, he can get a greater fulfillment in doing surgery than in the branch of medicine. And the fulfillment that one gets in his own soul is important.
You didn't go into it because you do good. You went into it because you enjoy doing what you do.
Right, correct. Not even for money, because being the head of an department, just being a school teacher, is not money, because all the fellows that I train who are not teaching make more money, far more money than I do, and I know it.
What would you like for the future of your profession?
Well, I think that maybe we should go back to a little broader base of training of surgeons, of training of medical schools, students. Because the training now is almost going to specializing in the right eye, and that's too much. I think we should go back to a broader base, because one can do a better job with the eye if he knows the basic sciences, if he knows something about some of the other disciplines. And so somewhere I think we should go to give the individuals who are going into a particular specialty a broader base and a wider base of training.
That doesn't conflict with that 28-month deal I asked you about earlier?
Well, yes, it does in a way. But now how you're going to reconcile those two things, I don't know. But I do know that the time, as chairman of the curriculum committee, that the time we use for training the students is not necessary.
And that's what medical school does.
We don't do it much
School
all the
trains
time.
people. It doesn't really educate folk, does it?
No. No professor in the world can educate a student. A student must educate himself. The only thing the professor does is guide him, direct him, stimulate him. That's why in our discussions with my staff, with the curriculum committee, I let them go ahead and prepare a lecture for 10 hours, for 1 hour lecture, and I go with the students with the same type of thing that make the students go dig it out of various journals and various textbooks and bring it back to me, and I just straighten them out. And those two groups of students, the one who do it themselves will learn far more.
What do you think is going to happen with our healthcare delivery system?
I think it's going to continue to grow, but I think it's going to go toward involvement of a larger number of people. We have health care delivery now, but a large percentage of the population of America does not have good health care. Actually, we don't know how to deliver the best health care. That's why we have such a large research grant in Meharry just for the best method of delivering health care. But I think the biggest single thing is the fact that it does not involve enough people. Now, you say I'm for universal health insurance. Of course, that is one of the answers. And that way, all the individuals can get health care properly if we, of course, you got to have enough doctors. Therefore, we got to go to the so-called physician extenders and that type of thing. And for the question of the government paying for health care, I'm for that. I remember when I was president of the National Medical Association, the American Medical Association was fighting Medicare. As president of the National Medical Association, I insisted that we must support Medicare because so many blacks and so many poor people could not pay for Medicare, and at that age. And with the Medicare, they would be assured of good training. And when we met with President Kennedy in those days, we pointed out, groups from the National Medical Association, that we were for the program 100%.
Nowadays, you're a provost for external affairs. Exactly what does that mean? What are you doing?
Well, I tell you, provost, I don't know what it is. I haven't seen anybody who didn't know, so I just call myself doing something. But actually, theoretically, when the president called himself, promoted me to that, it was an academic appointment. And what it means is we only have 225 50 beds at Meharry. We started off with 65 students. Now we take 112 students. We have not increased the beds. And so my business is to increase the beds, the number of beds from various places for the training of medical students. Now, it is done in various ways, of course, but up to now we've increased about almost 800 beds for exposure to medical students with cost containment, because Meharry is still a matter of cost containment.
Well, Dr. Walker, for me, this has been a very interesting session. And now that we're about to end, we will stop your punishment. You may pull out your cigar and light up.
Thank you so much. I need to smoke.